There are moments in childhood that define an entire generation. For kids growing up in the late 80s, one of those moments was walking into a computer shop and seeing something that would transform the world. There it was, humming quietly in the corner, a beige box with a keyboard that appeared to have arrived from the day after tomorrow. The Commodore Amiga 500. Picture the scene, 1987, and most families had only just got used to the idea of having a computer at home. The Commodore 64 dominated the market. Parents were still getting their heads around spending several £100 on what many saw as an expensive toy. And the idea of upgrading again so soon was a tough sell in most households. But by 1988, 1989, something was shifting. Prices were coming down. The Amiga 500 was becoming more accessible. And word was spreading amongst kids about what this machine could actually do. Those lucky enough to finally convince their parents to make the leap discovered something extraordinary. Whilst their friends were still loading games from cassette tapes and waiting 5 minutes for a simple platformer to appear on screen, the Amiga was doing things that seemed impossible. It wasn't an upgrade, it was a generational shift. Full colour graphics that made everything else look primitive, stereo sound that actually sounded musical, and games that loaded from floppy disks in seconds rather than hours. For those young enough to witness this transformation firsthand, it revolutionised what they thought computers could do. Join me as we take a journey back to when computer gaming went from simple entertainment to something approaching art. If you were a young computer enthusiast in the late 80s and early 90s, just hearing the name Commodore Amiga probably sent a little shiver down your spine. The Amiga was a revolution, and for the generation of kids lucky enough to experience it, it was nothing short of magical. To understand the impact, you need to know the computing landscape of the mid-80s. Most families were still coming to terms with their first home computer purchase. The pace of technology wasn't what it was today. When your family bought a computer, you expected it to last. The idea that there might be something significantly better just around the corner wasn't really on most people's radar. Then in 1985, Commodore released the Amiga 1000, followed by the more affordable Amiga 500 in 1987. And suddenly, everything transformed. Here's the thing. Most kids did not get their hands on an Amiga immediately. These machines were expensive, so the Amiga became the ultimate prize for young computer enthusiasts. You'd hear about it from that one kid at school whose parents had more money than sense, or you'd see it running in a computer shop displaying graphics and playing sounds and playing games that seemed to come from another planet entirely. The technical specifications, even for today, are pretty impressive. The Amiga's custom chipset, a legendary trio of processors with names like Paula, Denise and Angus, could display up to 4,096 colours simultaneously, when other computers were struggling with just 16. It had 4-channel stereo sound when most machines could barely manage a few beeps, and perhaps most remarkably, it had true preemptive multitasking, meaning that you could run multiple programs at once without the whole system crashing. Something that would become standard for PCs years later was right there in the 1980s. But the Amiga didn't arrive in a vacuum. It landed on a digital battlefield with contenders vying for the crown. The most famous rivalry, of course, was against the formidable Atari ST. In computer shops and school playgrounds across the world, you were either in the Amiga camp or the ST camp, and the battle lines were fiercely drawn. Nicknamed the Jackintosh, the ST was a powerhouse in its own right. Its built-in MIDI ports making it the instant darling for musicians, and its razor-sharp, high-resolution monochrome monitor was a godsend for desktop publishing. But for all of its strengths, it felt like a machine built for a purpose, whereas the Amiga felt like a machine built for magic. The ST could make music, but the Amiga's Paula sound chip could make a symphony of digital sounds. The ST had impressive graphics, but the Amiga's custom chipset delivered silky smooth scrolling and a painter's palette of vibrant colours that made its games feel like living, breathing arcade experiences. And the threat didn't stop there. In the UK, the fearsomely clever Acorn Archimedes, powered by the revolutionary ARM processor, was technically superior in raw speed, but was hobbled by a high price tag and a drought of must-have games. Meanwhile, the boring beige box in the corner, the IBM PC, was slowly waking up with the arrival of VGA graphics and the first Sound Blaster cards. It was beginning its relentless transformation from a business tool into a multimedia challenger. For those who just wanted to play, the simple plug-and-play fun of consoles from Sega and Nintendo presented an entirely different lure. Yet the Amiga, for a golden period, won out. It hit the perfect, exhilarating sweet spot. It was more vibrant and creatively potent than its direct rivals, more accessible than the high-end workstations, and infinitely more versatile than a simple games console. It wasn't a computer, it was a revolution for the home, and it was winning. But what made the Amiga truly special wasn't just the raw specifications. It was what those specifications allowed you to do. For the first time, home computer users could create things that looked and sounded professional. Deluxe Paint, which came with many Amiga bundles, was a gateway to digital artistry. This was the program that breathed life into graphics for games like The Secret of Monkey Island. In a piece of digital gaming folklore, the protagonist Guybrush Threepwood got his name because the artist, Steve Purcell, saved the character file simply as Guy, and then Deluxe Paint added the dot brush extension. The name Guybrush stuck. The software's influence was so immense that its MS-DOS variant was later used by artists at ID Software to forge the iconic pixel art for PC titans like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Dan Silver's creation truly democratized and revolutionized digital art, introducing concepts like color cycling for animation and brush tools that are still fundamental in modern software today. And the games, the games! This is where the Amiga truly came alive, where other computers were still dealing with blocky sprites and simple sound effects. Amiga games were cinematic experiences. I remember the first time that somebody showed me The Secret of Monkey Island running on an Amiga. There was Guybrush in all his pixelated glory, but with smooth animation and detailed backgrounds and that incredible soundtrack. LucasArts understood what the Amiga could do, and they pushed it to its limits. The point-and-click adventure games they created set the standard for storytelling in games for decades to come. The witty dialogue, the memorable characters, the atmospheric music, all of this was possible because the Amiga had the hardware to support it. And then there was Lemmings, developed by DMA Design in 1991. Those little green-haired creatures with their distinctive "oh no" when they exploded became cultural icons. The game's combination of puzzle solving and real-time action, backed by that unforgettable soundtrack, showed what the machine was capable of when developers really understood its strengths. DMA Design would later become Rockstar North, creators of Grand Theft Auto. But it was Lemmings that established their reputation. The platformers were equally as impressive. Shadow of the Beast, with its parallax scrolling and atmospheric soundtrack, well, it felt immersive, it felt alive. Games like Turrican and its sequels showed that the Amiga could handle the fast-paced action of other consoles just as well as thoughtful adventures. But perhaps nothing captured the creative spirit of the Amiga quite as well as the creative tools that you had access to. The 3D construction kit opened up world building to anybody. Well, to anybody with a lot of patience anyway. Using the Freescape engine, you could create elaborate 3D environments complete with interactive objects and scripted events. The shoot-'em-up construction kit did the same thing for arcade-style games. Want to create your own R-Tape clone? Well, now you could. And whilst these were all available on other platforms, developers often chose the Amiga to show off their creations. Having one of these machines felt like you were right in the heart of modern gaming, that you, an ordinary user, had the power to create content that had previously been the exclusive domain of professional developers. And we can't talk about the Amiga without mentioning the demo scene. This was something truly unique to the platform. Groups of programmers and artists pushing the machine to its absolute limits, creating audio-visual experiences that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Watching a demo such as State of the Art by Spaceballs was witnessing digital sorcery. This was pure and simple art rendered through technology. The Amiga also became the platform of choice for serious creative work. Video production houses used Amigas for titling and effects and editing. The video toaster became legendary in television production, used on shows like Babylon 5. Musicians used them for sequencing and sampling, with tracker software such as Pro Tracker becoming a foundation for whole genres of electronic music. The community that grew up around the Amiga was passionate and creative and incredibly supportive, and amazingly still going today. The magazines were the lifelines of this community, connecting enthusiasts who understood that they were part of something special. Cover discs that came with these magazines were treasures in themselves. Each month brought new demos, utilities, and games to try. And I remember the excitement of getting the latest issue of Amiga format and carefully removing the disc and spending hours just exploring everything that it contained. These discs were monthly gifts packed with surprises and new discoveries. But the best thing was the demo games. Games, were harder back then, back in the 80s. A throwback to developers who'd been used to creating for arcade machines where they needed to be, more complicated so they take more of your money. So a good demo could take a good amount of time to beat. It almost felt like you were getting an entire game because most people didn't get past the first few levels of a game anyway. The magazines fostered a sense of community that extended far beyond their pages. In a legendary example, when a young Andy Davidson submitted a game then called Total Wormage to an Amiga format Blitz Basic competition, it was disqualified on technical grounds. But the game was so brilliant that the magazine staff, including Marcus Dyson, championed it anyway. This support helped put the game on the path to being published by Team 17 and becoming the global smash hit we know today as Worms. This was the kind of community the Amiga created, one where a bedroom coder's genius could be recognized and nurtured into professional success. Looking back now, it's clear that the Amiga was technologically advanced in ways that ultimately contributed to its commercial downfall. While Commodore was creating this incredible machine, the rest of the world was standardizing on inferior but more business-friendly platforms. The reason for the Amiga's commercial failure are well documented and heartbreaking. Poor management at Commodore led to cancelled projects such as the advanced AAA chipset and disastrous cuts to research and development and funding. They meant a downturn in what they were producing. Marketing was a catalogue of errors. In the US, the Amiga was sold in toy stores alongside consoles, completely underselling its power, whilst a confused retail strategy alienated the specialist computer stores that should have been its biggest champions. The company simply didn't seem to understand the multimedia powerhouse that it had created or who it was for. By the early 1990s, PC compatibles were becoming more affordable and upgradable, with widespread software support that the Amiga just couldn't match. The custom chipset that had been the Amiga's strength became its weakness. And whilst PCs could simply add a better graphics card, the Amiga was locked into its aging hardware architecture. When games such as Doom arrived in 1993, highlighting what PCs could do with VGA graphics, the Amiga's planar graphics suddenly looked outdated. But for those of us who were there, who experienced the Amiga in its prime, it remains something special. It was the computer that showed us what was possible, and it opened our eyes to the creative potential of digital technology. It turned us from passive consumers into active creators, giving us tools that were previously unimaginable. The Amiga taught us that computers didn't have to be boring business machines or simple games consoles. They could be instruments of creativity, platforms for artistic expression, and gateways to new forms of entertainment. Every modern creative application, every media experience, every piece of digital art owes something to the path that the Amiga blazed. 40 years later, the influence of the Amiga can still be felt throughout the computing world. The multitasking operating systems that we take for granted, the sophisticated graphics and sound capabilities of modern machines, the very idea that a computer should be a creative tool as much as it is a practical one. All of these concepts were pioneered by the Amiga. the community hasn't forgotten. Modern projects such as dpaint.js recreate Deluxe Paint in web browsers. For dedicated enthusiasts, new hardware like the Amiga 1 systems continues the platform's evolution. And for the rest of us, retro consoles like the hugely popular A500 Mini keep the spirit alive, making it easier to plug in and play the classic archives that have been carefully preserved by thousands of dedicated fans. And that's thousands of cover discs and demos and games, ensuring future generations can experience what made this machine so very special. So here's to the Commodore Amiga, the computer that transformed everything, the machine that revealed the future, and the platform that created a generation of digital artists, programmers, and dreamers. And I count myself amongst that throng. I do creative work now because of the tools the Amiga gave me back then, that showed me that it was possible, that I could do it. It may be 40 years old, but for those of us who remember, it will always be the computer that made us believe in magic. What are your Amiga memories? Did you spend hours in Deluxe Paint creating your masterpieces? Did you lose weeks of your life to Lemmings or Monkey Island? Were you part of the demo scene pushing the hardware to its limits? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your stories about the machine that changed computing forever and certainly changed computing for me.